If we are honest, we're all managing difficulties and constant change around us. Even talking about self-care can be overwhelming because we think, how can I possibly fit one more thing into my day? Or maybe we're just trying to have the stamina to keep going. I think we've all found ourselves in similar places, or the pressure to keep going and questioning if we're ever doing enough or doing it right, both at home and at work. We are going to take a step back for a short time and remember the importance of self-care. We all know it's important. We've all heard the airplane analogy of we have to put on our own air mask first and then help others. But are we really practicing this in our daily lives? Throughout this presentation, we are going to discuss the impacts of stress on our overall well-being and practices for building our resilience. Our hope is that you leave this with an idea of what a best first step would be for you in your practice of self-care. First, we are going to take a look at stress and how our stress has an impact on our lives and well-being. We are all juggling a lot and have many demands throughout our day-to-day, but often it's how we are carrying the stress that leads to feeling overwhelmed or burned out. If we think about our well-being in terms of a backpack and our stress are weights that are added to the backpack, we would all have so many weights added in just in the roles and responsibilities we carry out on a day-to-day basis, both personally and professionally. If we never take time to set the backpack down or reevaluate what's going into our backpack, it gets far too heavy sooner rather than later, and we start to see the impacts of stress on our overall being. So at looking at some ways that we might see the impact of stress, we can first look at the way we work and manage our daily life. So how are we managing our workload? Are we taking time to decompress from work and transition into home life? How are we managing the stressors at home in dividing up tasks or maintaining a family schedule? And something important to note is as stress builds, it can become easy for feelings of anxiety or fear or this feeling of overwhelm to creep in and to lead to burnout, both at home and at work. So how we choose to cope with these emotions and stress can affect not only our well-being, but the well-being of the people that we care about, our workplace, and our community. And what we may find is that our past coping is no longer helpful, and we're at a spot where we need to adjust our current coping mechanisms. Or perhaps we've seen some values shifted in our life, whether that be over time or due to the work that we do or a major event in your life or community. Either way, it's critical that we recognize what stress looks like in our lives. We take steps to build our resilience, manage our job stress, and know where to go when we need help. Stressors can be a single incident or ongoing circumstances or concerns. How we react to these experiences is going to be different based on our upbringing, our background, your personality, and your current environment and psychological status. However, there are 3 factors that have been found to universally increase our stress levels, and those factors are uncertainty, a lack of information, and a loss of control. We do not like the feeling of being out of control, and it often leaves us feeling like we are grasping at straws. So if we think about this, it could be in one major event, or it could be this buildup over time of all these little things that slowly build and build until it gets to be too much. So we can think about it like a leaky faucet that just keeps dripping and we can't seem to fix it. And so when we see these factors build, we can see the impact of stress on biological, psychological, and behavior levels. And we start to see changes in those areas. And so some of the ways that we start to see some of those impacts or changes are listed here on this slide. So we can see physical impacts So pretty common ones can be headaches or indigestion or heavy chest, difficulty breathing. We can see cognitive, mental. We can start to feel some brain fogginess, like some confusion or poor attention. It can be really hard for us to concentrate on a task, both at home and at work. We can start to see some emotional impacts. Maybe it comes out in irritability or frustration. Maybe it comes out in inappropriate emotional responses. We react in a way that we later think on and we think, oh, it probably didn't warrant that kind of response. But we lost control in that moment and reacted inappropriately. We can see some behavioral changes. We can lose interest in activities or communication with our support people or people at work. And we start to see some of that social withdrawal. So there's a wide range of changes that we can see on all of these levels. But what's important to note is everyone will wear their stress differently. And so what's important is focusing on how you wear your stress, not how those around you are doing. It can be easy to think, man, everybody just has it so together. And we live in a world that is ever changing and social media being a big part of that. Nobody posts their most unattractive pictures, right? Everybody is putting their best foot forward on social media and just in general when we're interacting, right? Typically when we ask others how they're doing, we get a simple, oh, everything's fine, or we're good, just busy. And so it can be easy to feel like, man, am I the only one struggling? But the reality is we're all managing struggles in our own ways, and that's going to look differently. And so focusing on maybe what are your indicators of stress, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, or behavioral. What are some of your warning signs that maybe stress is building and it's time to do a check-in with yourself? So with everything that we've reviewed regarding stress, the question becomes, what can we do? The first thing we want to do is take a moment to pause. When we take time to pause, we can ask ourselves some questions about our current self-care practices. What are they? Are they sustainable? And we can really evaluate where we might need some improvement. But with self-care, I often hear from people, taking time for myself feels selfish. And it's important to note, selfishness is a perfectly healthy quality. We have heard since we were kids, don't be selfish. We don't want to hurt others or help ourselves at others' expense. And while this is a good lesson, it should not obligate us to give of ourselves without restriction. We have to learn to be okay with taking care of ourselves. We are going to stick to some of the basics and explore next what self-care could look like. But no, over time, you will find your own rhythm and routine. You will be able to implement more and identify more particular forms of self-care that work specifically for you. Keep in mind that we can't always make large deposits of time in self-care, but 5-minute deposits and increasing their frequency is much more impactful than waiting for the right time to take care of yourself. Before we can focus on the growth, we have to pause and reflect. Growth takes time, self-awareness, and skill development. But the hardest part about growth isn't actually the doing, it's the pausing. Most of us are so busy between work and home life that we are often buzzing from one thing to the next. The fires or the problems get our attention, and as soon as one is out, another has a way of popping up. If we don't take time to pause and reflect, we are missing moments. Moments with our family, with a coworker, with a stranger who could have made an impact on our day if only we were present. Living an intentional life requires good awareness of ourselves and others. To build that awareness, we need to slow down and insert time to reflect on where we have been, where we are, and where we want to see ourselves going. So before we get into what builds our resiliency, let's define that first. Resiliency is the ability to bend and not break under pressure, and the ability to bounce back, recover, and grow through challenges. So let's take a tree as an example. A tree has to be able to withstand high winds, storms, different kind of wildlife, and be able to hold strong amidst their environment in circumstances that are outside of control. And much like that tree, we all have areas in our life and things moving around us that we don't have control over, that we have to be able to stand against. And so much like a tree, we have to look at where are our roots? How are our roots doing? Are we firmly planted? So we have the ability to bounce back and actually grow through the challenges. So not that we're just surviving, but that we can come out of a challenge saying, you know, I am now able to take learnings and to grow through that challenge. So what does it look like to build our resiliency? As I mentioned earlier, we need to increase our awareness and be in tune with our needs. We need to be aware of our mindset and evaluate if we are engaging in activities and with people that bring us joy. And we want to look at how we are valuing the importance of social connections while also maintaining healthy boundaries. So let's take a look at some tools for practicing building our awareness. First, we can practice an emotional check-in. This could look like setting our intention for the day. What do I want the day to look like? Or what would we like to accomplish? There is a lot of power in our thinking and taking time to check in, set an intention for the day, and see that as an opportunity to start the day in the direction we want to see. We can also practice different breath work. We can pause and take some intentional breaths. This gives us a chance to check in on how we are feeling, both physically and mentally. And this is a practice we could use anywhere. One technique is called box breathing. In this exercise, we breathe in and count to 4, hold that for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold that for 4 counts. While we are doing this, we can imagine drawing a box in our mind. And again, this just gives us a brief moment to press pause and take inventory on how we are responding and how we are doing both physically and mentally. We can also get in the habit of utilizing our bookends. For most of us, the majority of our time is controlled by work and family life. That means there's a lot of our time already accounted for. So we have to look at where we have time. Bookends are the very beginning and very end of our days. So we can practice intentionality with our first 10 minutes and our last 10 minutes. Maybe that looks like sitting outside with a cup of coffee, or maybe practicing gratitude in the evening by writing down 3 good things about your day. Again, there is power in our thinking, and taking time to reflect on the positive can make a big impact in our overall mindset and well-being. So along with building our awareness, something that helps improve is our mindset, when we can be intentional about our thoughts and our reactions. So what we know is that our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all connected. And our brain is wired towards the negative, which is to protect us, but that also means we have to work to create more positive pathways. It takes intentionality to practice gratitude or consider a positive outcome rather than the worst case scenario. What we think about is what we become. So what do we want to become, and how do we want to respond? When we think about some of those questions, we may think about some of the traits here on this slide. We want to have a positive energy or enthusiasm about life. We can consider where we pull our hope from, what motivates or encourages us to live a full life. We may think about the way we show love or care to those around us, or practice gratitude and express appreciation. These are traits that not only impact our reactions, but also how we engage with our family and community at large. Social connection is one of the top indicators in our level of resilience. We are inherently social beings, and as far as we can trace, humans have traveled, hunted, and thrived in social groups, and for good reason. Humans who were separated from the group often suffered severe consequences. Social groups provide us with an important part of our identity, and more than that, they teach us a set of skills that help us to live our lives. Feeling socially connected, especially in an increasingly isolated world, is more important than ever. With that said, we also have to look at our boundaries within relationships. The word boundary can be a little bit misleading, and sometimes it conveys this idea of keeping ourselves separate from others. But boundaries are actually connecting points since they provide healthy rules for navigating relationships, both personal and professional. So when we think about the word boundaries, we think about this is kind of our rule book. This is who has access to what level of information. Um, and so when we think about boundaries, we can think about that in terms of level of relationship. We can think about that in terms of level of information that we share or the time that we dedicate. And so when we are thinking about our boundaries, I want us to keep in mind when we say yes to something, we inevitably say no to something else, whether that no is an intended no or unintentional. So when we say yes to spending time with that individual, we inherently are saying no to something else. And so I want to encourage us to make ourselves a priority and make that one of our non-negotiables. Now, that doesn't mean that our community and friends and family always get a no, but balancing that scale out, maybe a little bit more than most of us typically do, to look at where and who get my yes. Am I often telling myself no? Am I saying yes at the expense of my own care? And really prioritizing what and who gets our limited time. And we also want to think about if we don't ask, we're probably not going to receive. If we don't ask for what we need within relationships, if we don't make our expectations known both personally and professionally, we're making that person play a guessing game, and those needs or expectations probably aren't going to be met, or at least not up to the standards that we would like to see. And so make a practice of expressing those needs and those expectations. We can ask ourselves, is that an unspoken expectation that I have of that person? Or is that an expectation that I place on myself, and so I'm projecting that now onto those around me? So when we think about boundaries in relationships, we want to think about how can we cultivate positive relationships in community. And a big piece of that is communicating what gets our yes and no, what are our expectations in terms of time or the way we want to be cared for, and ensuring that open communication and respecting the boundaries of others as well. Because in our relationships, we have control over our boundaries and our yeses and nos. We do not have control over the boundaries of others or expectations of others. So that brings us to this idea of control. And so here we're looking at what do we have control over? And we can think about this in the two bucket theory. So everything we can control lands into one of two buckets, our actions and reactions, which again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, most of us don't like to feel out of control. And if you're anything like me, it doesn't seem like enough to only have two buckets of control. But when we really break things down, the only pieces we have control over are ourselves and how we choose to act and how we choose to respond. So what do we not have control over? Literally everything else, everything outside of our own actions and reactions. So this means we have to come to terms with the fact that we cannot control others. This means those that we love, those that we don't love, those we know, and those we don't know. When we begin to make our choices based on anything other than our own actions and reactions, it will not take long for us to begin to experience kind of that out of control feeling where we're just kind of grasping at straws. We have all likely tried to control someone else's decision. For some of us, this has looked like trying to tell somebody else, maybe a teenager, what they are and are not going to do while they are not under your watchful eye. Think back on how that has worked. For some of us, that might look like trying to give advice to a coworker, and the solution seems so simple, and we get frustrated when they don't follow through. Or maybe it's expectations we have of a partner and the frustrations that come when they don't meet those expectations. So the reality is the list of what we don't have control over is endless. How others feel, how others act, what others expect of us, what they believe about us. If we do not have a clear understanding and evaluation of the shorter list, which is what we do have control over, this can feel completely overwhelming. So when we find ourselves in that space, it's important to come back to, where do I have the control? We come back to, what are my actions contributing to this circumstance? Or how do I intentionally want to respond? Because that is where I'm going to find that space of control. As we wrap up this presentation, I want to encourage you to reflect on what you heard today and pick one thing, one area you feel could be helpful to you. Consider what it might look like to implement one piece into your routine. We do not have to overhaul the whole system at once, just one act that feels like a doable and sustainable step towards practicing your self-care. Thank you for completing this training. Please note there is contact information provided to you on this slide if you ever need to get in touch with Encompass or Backing the Badge for any well-being needs. Thank you.